Welcome to the virtual experience for this year's Regeneron International Science and Engineering Fair. I'm sure you're all thinking the same thing I am. I would much rather be in Anaheim, California. But due to the world we're living in right now and the challenges that we're facing due to COVID-19, I'm just grateful that we can all be here together in this space to spend time together. Let's face it, now more than ever, it's important for those of us in the science and engineering community, and frankly, anyone with a passion for knowledge and innovation, to communicate, to support each other, and to share the bond that we all have, the universal language of science. So I'm glad we're here. We have some great virtual experiences planned for you, and this is our kickoff to an amazing week here at Virtual Regeneron ISEF. I also want to welcome all of you who've never been a part of ISEF before. The International Science and Engineering Fair is a program of Society for Science and the Public, and it's the world's largest pre-college science competition. Through a global network of affiliated local, regional, and national science fairs, over 1,800 students qualify from the millions who have demonstrated their knowledge of science and engineering at their local fair. The contributions of every student further their and our understanding of the world and improves the way that we work and live. ISEF is personally one of my favorite events of the year because it's an inspiring example of the power of science to connect every corner of the globe and to activate knowledge for the common good. It fills me with such hope to see the enthusiasm and the creativity and the deep thinking that all of you are bringing to your chosen areas of research. It's possible that career-defining collaborations are being formed as you meet and get to know your fellow participants, and it's an honor for me to host this event. As you know, obviously, this year we're unable to gather in person, and many of the affiliated fairs have been unable to gather as well. But thanks to technology, virtual Regeneron ISEF is open to everyone. So whether this is your first ISEF or not, you're all now part of the first ever virtual ISEF. Now, before we go any further, let's recognize and thank our many international sponsors and supporters. But first and foremost, a big thanks to Regeneron for their passion and commitment in leading the charge as our new title sponsor. And now, I'd like to introduce you to someone who most of you already know, Maya Ajmera. Maya is the president and CEO of Society for Science and the Public and publisher of Science News. She's also an award-winning children's book author with over 20 titles. She's held several academic appointments and is herself an alumna of the 1985 Science Talent Search. Everyone, it's my privilege to welcome Maya Ajmera. Hi, Maya.
Thank you, Crystal, and welcome everyone. I have to admit that I never thought I would be here today speaking to you from my room full of books, but I'm so very happy to be able to welcome you to the virtual Regeneron International Science and Engineering Fair. I'm so honored to represent the Society for Science and the Public, the nonprofit organization that has organized and produced the International Science and Engineering Fair since its founding more than 70 years ago. The past 2.5 months have been really hard. I cannot even begin to tell you how extremely difficult it was for me, for our whole team, to cancel the Regeneron International Science and Engineering Fair. It was devastating for us, for our sponsors, our affiliated science fair network, and for the hundreds of volunteers who help to make ISEF happen each year, especially our volunteers in Orange County, California, who worked extremely hard on this event. But most of all, I know it was crushing for all of you. Each day, we would check the data from the Centers for Disease Control and the World Health Organization to give us the confidence that the science fair community could come together safely in Anaheim, California, for the world's largest pre-collegiate STEM competition. Ultimately, we determined that it just wasn't safe to bring together nearly 2,000 young scientists and engineers from around the world. For the Society, that disappointment bred creativity. We made an extremely sharp pivot and hatched an idea to create a virtual event. Without geography to get in our way, the sky was the limit in finding speakers and developing online experiences. I still can't believe that the extraordinary team at the Society for Science and the Public put this virtual event together in a month. This has truly been a team effort with the entire society involved. Staff members who worked on our other competitions, the Regeneron Science Talent Search and the Broadcom Masters, as well as our outreach and equity team, dedicated themselves to this effort. One of the most exciting parts of planning virtual Regeneron ISEF was bringing together top minds from around the world to share their stories and breakthroughs with you. You will learn from some amazing individuals, from Nobel laureates Frances Arnold and Elizabeth Blackburn, to internet pioneer Vint Cerf, to entrepreneur Haley Bay Barna, to renowned physicist Brian Greene, to CRISPR co-founder Feng Zhang. You will also hear from our award-winning journalists from Science News and Science News for Students this week, too. Nearly every single person we contacted to speak said yes right away. Their commitment to ensuring that we could do this and organize the celebration of science touched us very deeply. I'm grateful to all of our speakers this week. Once we started thinking about all the extraordinary people we could have speak, we realized that with a virtual experience, we didn't need to limit who could participate. So we're now bringing together the entire scientific and engineering community in this celebration. For those of you who are new to our community, we welcome you with open arms. We live in a challenging and complicated world, but I think there's one thing we've all learned during this time: the importance of science. We're deeply thankful to all the scientists and engineers who are working to develop drugs, vaccines, ventilators, and PPE to help us through the COVID-19 crisis. I know it can be so difficult to find hope when we're all stuck inside and frankly scared. But coming together this week as one community that believes in science makes me incredibly happy. By the way, did you know that the social distancing as a means to fight viruses like COVID started with an ISEF project? You'll be hearing from that alum, Laura Glass, later this week. I also feel optimistic in the work being done by young people. I've been hearing from students around the world who are doing amazing things, working to develop an inexpensive ventilator or creating a website to enable more people to find testing sites. Young scientists are motivated to make this world a better place. Our community has always been a breeding ground for leaders and visionaries, for young people looking to push the envelope on what is possible across science and engineering. Our world will be looking to you, all of you, to solve the world's most intractable problems, like this horrible pandemic or whatever comes next. Each of you has the potential to change the world. Please remember that you have it in you to make an impact. You are the stewards of our future. As I close, I want to thank our unbelievable science fair community. This has been a challenging year, and I appreciate all you have done to keep our students safe. I'm also so grateful to our sponsors who shared our vision in creating a virtual event. Thank you to our title sponsor, Regeneron, to George Yankopoulos and Len Schleifer, Regeneron's co-founders, and Hala Mirza, Regeneron's Senior Vice President for Corporate Communications and Citizenship, and her team. You will hear from George in a few moments. He is very inspiring. Thank you to our major sponsors, Akamai Foundation, Broadcom Foundation, Johnson & Johnson, Microsoft Azure Sphere, National Geographic Society, RISE, an initiative of Schmidt Futures and the Rhodes Trust, and the Siegel Family Endowment, as well as other wonderful funders for their support. Again, remember, you have the power to change the world and make it better. We are counting on every young person to use your ingenuity and hard work to solve the world's most intractable problems. Godspeed.
Thanks, Maya. And now I'd like to take a moment to share with you just how global our Regeneron ISEF community truly is, representing over 50 countries, regions, and territories. Let's take a look as we get together around the world.
Let's get together. let's get together. Let's get together. Everybody, let's get together. Let's get together. Let's get together. Like family. Now more than ever, there is something happening. It's now or never. 'Cause there's something happening here. Let's get together. Let's get together. Let's get together. Everybody, let's get together. Let's get together. Let's get together. Like family. It's getting crazy. All you people out there, listen now. I'm thinking maybe that it's time we all start gathering round. Let's get together. Let's get together. Let's get together. Everybody, let's get together. Let's get together. Let's get together. Like family. Let's get together. Let's get together. Let's get together. Everybody, let's get together. Let's get together. Let's get together. Like family.
That was awesome. A big thank you to all of you who submitted a video. And now, it's my pleasure to introduce Joe Palca. Joe is a science correspondent for National Public Radio in Washington, D.C., and is a longtime friend of ISEF. He's joined from New York by co-founder, president, and chief scientific officer at Regeneron, and a 1976 Science Talent Search alum, Dr. George Yancopoulos.
Thanks, Crystal. George, the opening question has to be, how does it feel to be a scientist with a company that's having such a big role in dealing with this COVID-19 pandemic? I mean, this has got to be unique in your career.
Yeah, it's a real responsibility and a real obligation. Obviously, we at Regeneron have dedicated our lives to using science and technology to come up with new treatments for disease, whether it be blindness or cancer or asthma or other diseases. But certainly we recognize here that there's a different sort of urgency. And moreover, I think that something much bigger than just this epidemic and this issue is at stake right now. It's the recognition now that this is a huge opportunity for things to change, for this to be a real wake-up call for humanity, to recognize that the real enemies are not each other. The partisan politics, the pointing of fingers and the assigning of blame, that doesn't really help us. We have to recognize that there are really true existential threats that face mankind and that threaten mankind, and that we have to come together to fight these threats. And only if we come together and we use the power of science innovation, can we perhaps really solve them. And I think this is a real opportunity for us to show both those things, that coming together as one is so important. And two, that science and innovation has to be such a critical part of the answer here for this epidemic, but for all of the existential threats that are facing mankind, whether it's this epidemic, disease in general, or the environment and climate change. It's not going to be policy. It's not going to be politicians arguing that they're going to solve those problems. It's brilliant young scientists having new ideas about how to change and save the world that's going to allow us to address these truly existential threats facing mankind.
So can you give us a brief look at the kinds of things Regeneron is working on? I know you're very keen to come up with antibodies that can prevent people from being infected with the virus, or if they are infected, to help their immune systems fight it off.
Right. So basically, I think we all know that hopefully a final solution or an answer will be a very safe and effective and widely available vaccine that create permanent immunity or long-term immunity in a large percentage of the people who get the vaccine. That's what we're all hoping for. And we, like hundreds of other companies, are working on trying to develop vaccines. However, as we've heard from many experts, including Tony Fauci, the head of the NIAID, vaccines could be a year or two away or longer, and they're no sure thing. And in fact, the people who might have the highest risk, the elderly, the immunocompromised, they're the ones who might actually have the worst responses to vaccine. So we've been trying to come up with additional approaches that could be available in the nearer term and could serve both as stopgaps and short-term measures until the vaccine, and even in some cases alternatives, or have applications even where vaccines can't work. So when we say a vaccine induces immunity, what we all know, that means that the vaccine induces antibodies in the body against the virus, antiviral antibodies that can literally bind to and kill the virus. What we've developed at Regeneron over the last few decades, we've invested much time and billions of dollars in resources to create highly innovative, state-of-the-art technologies that allow us to create exactly these sort of antibodies, antiviral antibodies, but we can make them outside of the body. We can grow them up in these massive bioreactors, purify them, and give them back to people. So it's as if we are giving an instantaneous vaccine, but frankly, one that is more powerful because it's a highly concentrated form of exactly the sort of antiviral antibodies that you want. There's a lot of reason to have hope and confidence in this approach because we've done it before. It's the same sort of technology that led to many of our drugs, for example, that fight blindness or fight asthma or fight cancer. But most relevant, it's the same exact approach that we utilize against Ebola and that epidemic. We created, using these technologies outside the body, anti-Ebola antibodies, highly potent and specific antibodies against the virus. And we grew them up, we gave them back to patients. And remember, Ebola is a much more universally lethal disease than COVID-19. And even in that setting, we were able to give these antiviral antibodies to people who were at early stages of infection and save almost all of them, and even give them to people at late stages of infection and save a large portion of them. So there's a lot of reason to have hope here. So with Ebola, we set the world record in going from starting the program to getting into clinical trials within about 9 months. This was all under the leadership of a great young scientist we have here, who I believe is going to be speaking at ISEF later, Christos Kyratsous. And he's also been leading our effort here against COVID-19, and we're hoping and planning on breaking that record from starting the program in January to being in clinical trials to test our antibodies, both to prevent disease but also to treat disease. We hope to be in clinical trials in June, which is about 5 months after we started the program. Things generally don't work that way. It's only because of the investments that we've made in science and technology over the last few decades that have allowed us to have the capability to do this, together with having great, brilliant young scientists who are able to lead the science like Christos to take us forward here.
It's an amazing story, and I'm sure that everybody is hoping that your drugs and other approaches will be successful. But let's take a little step back and talk about the early days of George Yancopoulos. Did you realize growing up that someday you'd be in this position, or was it something you dreamed of doing, or did it happen along the way?
Well, like I said, this is really important to me, the notion of inspiring the next generation of young scientists to answer the call. All I was doing was answering the call of the leadership at that time. I was very lucky, I think, to be an immigrant growing up in America in the 1960s. It was a very different world. Just like now, there were existential threats. We were in the depths of the Cold War. We had regular nuclear bomb drills in school where we would have to march out of the school and go to the basement of a nearby building to prepare in case the bomb actually hit. It was a constant reminder of what was at stake. And in school, we studied the words of our recently assassinated leader, JFK, who is one of my heroes. And he explained to us that for the first time in human history, man had created the power not only to destroy the world, which was so evident with the nuclear threat, but also to save it. And I'm going to read a quote that I'll never forget that in the speeches that we studied. He talked about Malthus, who was a philosopher in the 1700s, who he said, argued a century and a half ago that man, by using up all his available resources, would condemn humanity to an indefinite future of misery and poverty. We can now begin to hope that Malthus was expressing not a law of nature, but merely the limitation then of scientific wisdom. The truth or falsity of his prediction will depend on our use of science and technology now and in the years to come. I have to say that I think that these words were so inspiring to me and to an entire generation, and he went beyond that. He challenged us. He told us that all great and honorable actions result from great difficulties, and if we should take on these challenges, not because they're easy, but because they are hard. But if we succeeded, we could save the world. And I didn't just have JFK. I had my parents growing up as an immigrant in New York City, poor Greek immigrants who had come from war, and they had seen America save the world. And they believed in this great country. And they believed that this country gave an opportunity to everybody to do anything. And they told me how lucky I was. And they told me that JFK was speaking to me directly. And I believed it. And I think that it was true, not only to me, but to everyone and to my entire generation. And it spawned a great generation of scientists. And I think that this is really the obligation and duty of our society now to realize that JFK's words were true. If we don't use science and technology to save ourselves, we're doomed. We're just like bacteria in an Erlenmeyer flask. The increasing density of the population, the way we're poisoning our environment, we're destined to choke ourselves off. And the only solution we have is in our ability to think, in our God-given ability to think our way past the problems that we've created. And it's our duty to use the science and innovation capabilities that we have. And I don't think we've been focused enough on that as a society. And that's why I think that this is a huge opportunity. This is a wake-up call. This is a realization that we have created a world now, and we can't think that this has nothing to do with, the increases in population density and the way we all live that have created these incredible challenges to mankind and that have given rise to this epidemic. And we have to realize now that this is just an example of what the human race is going to increasingly be fighting against. And how do we fight back? By engaging the best and the brightest at the earliest stages, just like JFK was trying to do, and inspire them to join the war, the battle against these existential threats that are not us. We shouldn't be fighting each other. We should be coming together to fight against the common enemies, and we all know what they are. COVID-19 is an example of the disease and the increasing disease burden that we will be facing. We have our climate change problems and our environmental challenges. We have all of these real existential threats, and we have to recognize that we have to come together. And the thing that I think even some leaders don't recognize, who recognize these problems, some of the people who, there's some people who don't believe in the science. Well, there's some people who recognize the threats of climate change or disease, but they don't understand where America should be focusing on and where the solutions are going to be coming from. They're not going to be coming from changes in policy and so forth. They're going to be coming from the best and the brightest young minds that are incentivized and supported in the most powerful ways to think their way out of all of these problems that we have. And that's why I think that there's nothing greater than speaking to the next generation of such great young scientific leaders. Okay. I believed that it was my mandate. It was my challenge that my president and my parents were giving me to devote my life to using science to try to make a difference. And in response, we can point to new medicines we've come up with that treat everything from blindness to cancer to Ebola, and hopefully soon enough to COVID-19. Well, it's time for the next generation of young scientists to take on that challenge and realize it is up to them. They can do it. And one of the important things that made me recognize that I could do it was the recognition that I got at these scientific competitions that I competed on when I was in high school. And if you're in these competitions and you're doing well, that means that you have power, you have capability. And now it is your duty, your obligation, your responsibility to use that to fight against what's threatening mankind.
Yeah, I was just thinking though. There's another. The ISEF is a great place for people to convene who are thinking about science. There's another program that Society for Science and the Public puts on that I know Regeneron is very generously supporting, called the Science Talent Search. That had a big role in your life. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, like I said, competing in science competitions and being one of the winners at what was then the Westinghouse Science Talent Search, it's now the Regeneron Science Talent Search, for sure changed my life. Because as I said, I was trying to answer the call. I wanted to believe that I could use science to make a difference. But sometimes it takes a little bit of a confidence, and it takes a little bit of other people saying, hey, yeah, you can do it, before you believe it. I had great teachers in high school, just like I'm sure many of the students now have, who helped support them in their interest in science and their ability to take on projects. And I think nothing is more exciting and fun than doing actual science, which you can actually experience in a real way at the high school level. But getting selected eventually to go to the finals and being one of the winners changed my life. It gave me, I think, that boost, that confidence that, yes, this is what I wanted to do, but maybe I really did have it inside me because I was being recognized as being one of these top young kids. And we do have to recognize these top young kids, and we have to do whatever we can to support them. I do have to say that when Regeneron took over the competition, I had a great experience in the very first competition finals that we hosted as a company, because at that great event where they announced the winners, there was a very elderly gentleman, and he wanted to come and speak with me and meet me. And he came up to me and he said, I haven't come to one of these events for over 10 years, but I had to come to this one when I found out that you and Regeneron were taking over the sponsorship of the Science Talent Search. Why? Because a few years ago, I was going blind and I was losing my vision from a disease known as age-related macular degeneration. And they told me that somebody and a company called Regeneron had come up with a new medicine that I could take that might not only save my vision, but give my vision back to me. So I took the medicine, and sure enough, I now have perfect vision. I can see my grandchildren. I can still watch TV. I can read. I can drive. And I found out that this company was started by this guy, George Yancopoulos, and this medicine was actually invented by this guy, George Yancopoulos, and that he had been a winner of the Westinghouse Science Talent Search. And I had been the equivalent of Maya. I had been the head of Society for Science and the Public. I'm the one who gave him his award when he was a winner of Westinghouse 40 years or so before. And I thought it was so amazing that one of the kids that I recognized and had honored as a winner many years later was able to come up with a medicine that so significantly changed my life. And I can only hope that the kids who are winning this year are going to be doing something that might help you or other people in such a significant way in the future. So that was just for me. I mean, the Science Talent Search, which was then Westinghouse, now Regeneron, it's changed my life then. But hearing stuff like that, it just reminds you the power that we have in our brains and in our hands to actually make a difference, to save lives, to change lives, and to fight back against these existential threats that we all face. And I just hope that whether it's ISEF, whether it's STS, that the young scientists out there that we're trying to engage and inspire recognize the power that they have. But what it'll take, they will truly have to devote and dedicate their lives to these challenges. But as JFK said, there is nothing more noble than fighting back against these very threats that challenge our entire species, entire humanity. And so I really hope that we can all come together to fight together, but most importantly, the next generation of young scientists can really rise up to this challenge and devote themselves to fighting back.
Brilliant. You know, it's sobering to realize that there's someone watching this video right now who in just a few years may hold the key to solving this problem or the next problem, because this isn't the end of the, as you call them, existential threats that face our civilization. Well, I'm afraid we've got to end it there. George Yancopoulos, what an interesting discussion. Thank you so much. Good luck with your work at Regeneron. And thank you again for speaking with us today.
Well, Joe, let me end by saying one thing along the lines of what you just said. That's exactly what I think of. When I go back to my high school, the Bronx High School of Science, and I talk to the kids there, or when I go to STS and I talk to the kids there, or I go to ISEF, and you know, I'm saddened that I don't have that opportunity. I find it inspiring, but every time I meet one of these kids, I think that could be one of those kids who goes forward and changes the world. Each and every one of you have that power inside of you. So why not be you, that kid that goes on to change and save the world? And I hope it is each and every one of you guys.
Fascinating. Really nice. Well, George, thank you again. And now let's send it back to Crystal in Indonesia.
Thank you, Joe. And a special thanks to Dr. George Yancopoulos. That's it. We've done it. We have kicked off our first ever Regeneron International Science and Engineering Fair, virtual edition. Return here to the main stage later today and the rest of the week to catch other great sessions and symposia. And don't forget to head back to the lobby to visit the ISEF Commons. Learn more about your fellow finalists in the exhibit hall, participate in the STEM experiential hall, and learn more about Society for Science and the Public, our sponsors, and so much more. Another big shout out to Regeneron as our new title sponsor. And once again, thank you all for joining and for sharing this week's experience with us. All of us here together. From Medan, Indonesia, thanks. And have a great week.